Great. So thank you for joining us. Here at the Reading League Michigan and the Reading League in general, our mission is to empower all educators to ensure all students become proficient readers and writers. We support educators in evidence-based literacy, systems, instruction, and resources. Again, welcome to our Reading League Wisconsin colleagues, that board meetings, that members that are with us. And there's a QR code right here for those of you in Michigan that have not joined our chapter yet. If you're interested, this will get you started. And if you're not from Michigan and you are not familiar with the Reading League, please check out the Reading League at thereadingleague.org. There are multiple chapters. So if there's not one in your state and it doesn't, or this map doesn't show that it's in your state, do reach out to our parent organization, because many are forming up, and gosh, almost every month we get a new one. So it won't be long before I'm sure that map is fully dark blue. I'm proud to be the president of the Reading League Michigan. And with that, I also would like to say I'm really proud of this new tool that we have for you. And the reviewer notebook is this, the workbook that goes with it is just such a great piece for you to use. And to walk us through our amazing tool is the wonderful Linda Diamond. So if you're not familiar with Linda, Linda has had dedicated her career to teaching children to read, particularly those with word reading difficulties like dyslexia. You might be most familiar with her, though, through the Teaching Reading Source Book, the Assessing Reading Book with Multiple Measures and Vocabulary Handbook. So these are textbooks that are found in many of our universities that are shifting to a science of reading evidence-based approach. And she's the co-founder of CORE, which is the Consortium on Reaching Excellence in Education. And she served as the president for 26 years. Linda has also worked as a public school teacher, principal, director of curriculum, instruction for the K-12 district, and senior policy analyst with an emphasis on school to career, charter schools, and school reform. And she's significantly important with all the legislation that's happening in California. So I am pleased to present and introduce to you tonight, Linda Diamond. Take it away, friend.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And I hope everyone can see it. Great. Well, thank you for having me. And yes, I'm really thrilled that a number of universities are using the Teaching Reading Sourcebook. Unfortunately, not enough universities around the country have significantly changed what they're doing yet. We're all kind of waiting for that to happen. And I think it will. I think it's growing. So I'm delighted to be here with all of you. I was born in Detroit, by the way. So Michigan is my home state. And I left when I was 7 years old, but I still have relatives there. So it's a place that's very meaningful to me. Okay, we're going to get rolling, and we're going to take a look at the new curriculum evaluation guidelines from the Reading League. This is one of the best resources for determining whether curriculum you're interested in is appropriate. So let's take a look at some of the things we're going to talk about today. Why this curriculum evaluation guidelines? I know there are other ways to look at curriculum out there, but I'm going to focus on this tool. I'm going to show some selected examples. I'm not going to try to show the whole curriculum guidelines tool. That would be quite foolish, but you have it, so you'll be able to look at the entire document. We're going to look at some of the evidence sources that they list, which is one of the things I really appreciate, is that they actually have listed the sources that gave rise to this document. I'm going to talk about some of the issues and concerns that I have and others in the science of reading community have with EdReports. And I'll talk very briefly about the purpose of the workbook and then leave with some recommendations. So let's get rolling. So I want to start with
Linda, you're muted.
yeah, there we go. So when you're reviewing Tier 1 curriculum, you want to be sure that they aren't using practices that aren't aligned with the scientific evidence. Sometimes even curriculum that's marked by, say, an organization like EdReports, and I'm going to show you examples, as meets expectations, actually has some components that are discrepant. The curriculum evaluation guidelines, however, were designed to highlight these non-aligned practices. They're calling them red flags. And they show you those in these areas: word recognition, language comprehension, reading comprehension, writing, and assessment. So that's what the curriculum evaluation guidelines do. There are some very important preliminary statements, and I think it's important to read them all because it cites some of the research understandings. The first being that learning to speak and understand language and learning to read and write, it's different. That we learn to speak and understand language from birth, but learning to read and write is not natural. The second big idea in these preliminary statements is that word recognition is really a foundation, and it's built upon an explicit systematic method for teaching how letters represent sounds, how they're used to sound out printed words, and how that in turn builds automaticity, subsequently fluency, so comprehension can proceed. It also has the statement that reading ability must develop so kids can comprehend ever more sophisticated content. That's the whole point. So emphasizing foundational word recognition is necessary, but not sufficient. So that's why we have to emphasize language development, vocabulary, syntax, discourse, and building background knowledge. Also, it's good to understand that reading is a complex behavior and that we're going to need to build on all of these skills, and that some students will require more and some will require less. And if 85% of students are not achieving proficiency in foundational skills with a Tier 1 curriculum, based on a reliable curriculum-based measurement, something is either lacking in the program or in implementation, but it's not the kids. And I would add, it's not their parents, it's not their family, it's not even their home language. So this is an important point that is in this document. I'm going to play a short video because I think this gives urgency to what we're trying to do. And if you can tell me if you hear it well, good.
Humankind's most precious treasure is our children, and our future depends on them. We recognize literacy as a fundamental human right that empowers individuals and a society. We also know that grim life outcomes are connected to illiteracy. We are resolved to prevent the collateral damage that is incurred by our students, especially the most vulnerable among them, when adults have limited access to the convergent scientific evidence. Research has yielded proven assessment and instructional practices with which every teacher and leader should be equipped. We believe that providing educators with this knowledge is a moral imperative. We are committed to evidence-aligned reading instruction being scaled with a sense of urgency in a comprehensive and systematic way by multiple stakeholders. We know that our children can be taught to read properly the first time. In a knowledge economy, the currency of the 21st century will be built on the foundation of skilled reading. Students who can read well have a place at the table of opportunity, whether their aspirations lead them to preparation for college or the workforce. We believe in a future where a collective focus on applying the science of reading through teacher and leader preparation, classroom application, and community engagement will elevate and transform every community, every nation through the power of literacy. Join us.
That was Dr. Tracy Whedon. She runs NIHouse Institute in Texas. And her message is absolutely vital, particularly at this time in our history, when we are seeing data from NAEP, for example, and other source that's showing us how many kids were failing in our country. Now, this is another reason that I think this curriculum evaluation tool is invaluable. It's built around the reading rope, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. But I'd like to point out a couple of really key ideas in this rope. The first is that word recognition and its sub-skills, therefore, need to become increasingly automatic. But language comprehension becomes increasingly strategic. Why is that? That's because background knowledge continues to grow, vocabulary continues to grow, the language structures, particularly syntax and semantics, get more complex. And as students progress through school, literacy knowledge grows as well. So while we can develop automaticity in word recognition, we need to understand that we have to keep working at language comprehension. And the bridge is fluency. Word recognition, which can lead to fluency, will support language comprehension, and then we get that fluent and skilled reading. Now, it's not enough that they built this around the reading rope. They also took into account writing and the research on writing. And as you'll see, they address those red flags. Now, what do you need to do before you use this tool? Well, you want to assemble a team. And this is key. That team needs knowledge. They need to understand what the science of reading is and what it isn't. That means probably that the team should go through some sort of professional learning that supports them understanding what they're looking for in the science of reading. And then you want to familiarize yourself with the materials that you've selected, particularly the scopes and sequence, and look at several lessons in targeted grades. You also want to look at the guidelines and how what's going on in the material aligns to the reading rope and what their components are. What's missing? I have to say, one of the things that I find missing often, and even very good curriculum, is attention to syntax. There isn't enough of that. And another piece that I often see missing is enough material for English language development for our multilingual students. When reviewing curriculum, you want to prioritize, look for those red flags, because if there's a lot of them, you probably can put that curriculum aside. You don't have to keep digging your way through it. And if you find that there are only some red flags, but there's not enough to discourage you, then you're going to keep going through it, but you might have areas that you need to augment. So here's an example from the word recognition part. And you'll see red flags, the 3 cueing systems for decoding, memorizing whole words by sight without attending to sound symbol correspondences. By the way, a recent study found that actually, while decoding even the irregular words is important, that there is a spelling method that actually got as good results as decoding these irregular words. So we're learning more every day. Those are the 2 methods. It was called read and spell that proved to be effective even with irregular words, just as the sound out, but then correct for the irregular part. You also notice a red flag if materials don't provide a systematic scope and sequence and enough practice. But what you're looking for is explicit instruction in phonemic awareness, phonics, and spelling, a systematic scope and sequence that goes from easier to more complex, and materials that provide the opportunities for practice, especially interleaving, so that you've got mixed practice after kids have learned something. Now, this is more detail. And here we have a list of red flags specifically. And you could see what some of these are. Sort of an opportunistic approach to letter sound correspondence, maybe a one and done, and there isn't enough review or practice. Letter sound correspondences are not aligned with the pure phonemes. Now, we've seen some curriculum that do perfectly well, even if they don't have quite a pure phoneme in their lessons, but it's important to understand that. Phonics instruction is like mini lessons or word work sessions. Blending, I'm skipping some of these because you'll have them, not explicitly taught or practiced. Again, that memorization. And then this whole idea not to provide word level decoding practice sufficiently, and they're using level text. Now, what is aligned with the science of reading? Well, we want the sounds and the sound spellings to be taught to automaticity. We want a cumulative review in place and then applied for sure. We want a systematic and sequential approach. Segmenting and blending taught explicitly in both decoding and encoding. That's another weakness I have found in many programs that are otherwise pretty good, but they don't do enough with spelling and encoding. And we all know that we can see those kids who can decode and read, but their spelling is horrible. I bet you've all seen that. We want explicit instruction that directs kids to the structure of the word. And we also want opportunities to practice both regular and irregular words in isolation and also in text. And then we need that advanced word study in grade 2 and above. And we're talking about syllables, morphemic knowledge, and the etymological influences, word origins, which interestingly, children love learning about words. They love learning about word origins. And then we've got that advanced word study where we're dealing with those advanced kids, digraphs, variant vowels, and we have to pay attention to our multilingual learners. Once they can decode a word accurately, it doesn't mean they have any idea what the word means. So we need to confirm that. We need to be sure we're connecting to meaning to make the decoding meaningful. And we need to understand sounds and spellings that transfer and focus on those ones that don't. Spanish, for example, has far fewer phonemes than English. That means we're going to have to really be explicit with those phonemes that are different than those in Spanish. This is another thing I appreciate. A glossary. How useful is that to have right there while you're reviewing? Okay, and then let's look at what they've said about language comprehension, reading comprehension and writing. So first we have those non-negotiables again in language comprehension, reading and writing, and these are going to be red flags. In the early grades, the framework is primarily a workshop approach with student choice and sort of incidental and embedded. They're not exposed to rich, complex syntax in reading and writing. The comprehension activities focus mainly on whether they understand content instead of supporting the process of comprehending. Writing is not taught or is taught totally separate all the time. And questioning during read alouds mainly focus on lower level questioning skills. What we do want to see is a clear, consistent instructional framework with a comprehensive scope and sequence with language comprehension, reading comprehension, and writing all in an explicit system. We want to see kids exposed to rich and complex syntax and academic vocabulary, both in reading and writing and orally, not just in read alouds. And for multilingual learners, we want that instruction in English language development and acquisition included to support reading comprehension. And we need to view our multilingual learners' language as an asset, not a deficit, and build on what they already bring to their learning. In language comprehension, just to get a little more specific in the area of background knowledge, well, if the read alouds are just simple stories or narrative only, that's not sufficient. If it's just level text, that's not sufficient. We want opportunities to bridge existing knowledge to new knowledge. If that's not showing up in the curriculum, that's an issue. And for kids who are automatic with the code, text for reading, if they're only those level text and they're not complex, that's insufficient. Now, what do we want to see? We want read aloud opportunities as they're learning the code, and those should be from text that's more complex to develop diverse syntax, to develop vocabulary. And it needs to be both narrative and informational text to build that background knowledge. And we want opportunities to make connections between new words or concepts and known words or concepts. And for multilingual learners, we want those opportunities to build background knowledge even in the student's home language, and that we can also enhance by using visuals and clarification. In vocabulary, if all you see are worksheets and words that they're given on Monday and then on Friday they take a test, that's not good. If the instruction is memorizing these out of context, if they're not taught also tier 2 words explicitly in practice and then given opportunities to use them, that's a problem. If they're not exposed and taught those more complex tier 3 words, which are specialized usually from a curriculum like social studies or science, for example, and we want to see instruction in morphology. If that's not present, that's a problem. So what do we want to see? We want robust teacher-student and student-student conversation around vocabulary. We need them to be taught deeply. We need explicit instruction in tier 2 and 3 words, as well as instruction in the context of texts. We want tier 2 words to be taught and then applied in speech, in print, in writing, and we want to see that instruction in morphology. And again, we want to support our multilingual learners in English language development. I want to clarify that for our English language learners in particular, we are needing to think of literacy and language at the same time. Language development is not the same as literacy development, but we need to develop that language, that oral language, and that understanding as well. Now, in language structures, what don't we want to see? Well, grammar and syntax taught implicitly or kind of opportunistically. There isn't sufficient modelings or discussion. And kids are asked to memorize parts of speech. By the way, just to clarify, grammar and syntax are not the same. Grammar are those word parts that we've labeled and identified, but syntax is how words are arranged to form sentences. And I'm going to add one other thing, and that is that in functional linguistic-based grammar, which is an approach that is relatively new in this country, but more familiar in Europe, what we know is that the same word that some people might call a noun actually might function as a verb or an adjective or an adverb or a preposition in the context of the sentence in which it's used. So we need to learn that words can have different functions depending on the syntax and how they're used. Now, what's aligned? Well, a clear scope and sequence needs to address grammar and syntax. We want sentence level comprehension to be taught, including the simple, the compound, the complex sentence. And we want sufficient time for discussion with good modeling and kids using and talking and writing in complete sentences. And then we need to highlight those differences between kind of everyday speaking and sentences that exist, especially in expository text. And then for our speakers of English language variations, you may think of this as dialects, African American English, for example, or Appalachian English, for example, which we need to use an asset-based approach, teaching contrastive analysis, and really focusing on that sentence structure, suffixes in particular, and subject-verb agreement. By the way, we're asking universities in their teacher prep to include instruction around English language varieties, as well as for multilingual learners. And that's an area that will be a growth area. In comprehension, if kids are just independently reading text that they can't decode, that's a problem. If they're asked to independently apply strategies in short, disconnected readings at the expense of knowledge building text, that's a problem. And if they're always just doing book choice without reading in addition complex text, that's a problem. And if all they're reading is level text or predictable text, or they're not taught methods to monitor, that's a problem. So we are looking for those rich read alouds as kids are still learning to decode. And then we want them to learn strategies that make a difference, like inferencing and summarizing. And we need to build that background knowledge. What about writing? Okay, this curriculum evaluation guidelines has a very strong writing component. We need handwriting instruction. That's important. We know that from research. And we need handwriting instruction not just to be an isolated add-on. We want explicit instruction in letter formation. And we need instruction that has lined paper to guide this and integrate it into their reading and writing. And this can happen when you're teaching decoding and then immediately followed with encoding. In composition, writing prompts with little time for modeling or planning is a problem. Unstructured, few models, conventions, grammar, syntax wasn't explicitly taught or practiced. It's primarily narrative or free choice. Kids aren't taught the writing process, and it's a standalone and not used to further comprehension. We do need a gradual release process. We need models. We need it to be structured. We need time to teach the process, and we need the conventions to be taught explicitly and applied, including sentence reduction and sentence combining. If any of you are familiar with Lily Wong Fillmore's work on deconstructing sentences, particularly for multilingual learners, this is very important and very useful. And we want it to reflect a variety of text types. What about assessment? That's another thing we're going to find in these guidelines. Well, if it's only assessment that measures comprehension without additional measures to figure out why kids aren't comprehending, it's just like going to the doctor with a fever and maybe some other presenting illness signals. But that's not enough. Usually they'll ask for a blood test, at least, to see if they can get at what are the underlying causes. Just take Tylenol or ibuprofen might not do the trick. And assessments that include miscue analysis and running records, those just come straight out of balanced literacy and are not what we want to see. We want to see assessments that give multiple data points for all the components. We want those that will help differentiate across a multi-tiered system and that are standard and reliable, particularly CBMs. You probably know of DIBELS, AimsWeb, EasyCBM, FastBridge, Star Reading. There's many CBMs out there. iReady, there's a lot on the market now. Also in assessment, we want not to see results in benchmark based on level text. Okay, what are we talking about? The Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessments. That's what we're talking about. Foundational skill assessments are primarily running records. I named that before, based on cueing. Phonics isn't assessed, nor phonemic awareness, nor decoding. Oral reading fluency isn't used. I do want to say something about that. An oral reading fluency test is not actually a test of fluency. It's actually what's called a general outcome measure. because it's highly predictive of overall comprehension. A lot of us who have actually been involved in developing some of those passages would really wish this to be renamed oral reading, timed oral reading, passage reading. Timed oral passage reading, which is really what it is, because people think it's fluency when we know that fluency is more than just rate and accuracy. It includes prosody and expression as well. There needs to be assessments to address language, vocabulary, syntax, and we want to find those assessments that provide opportunities to assess our multilingual learners in their home language. So IDLE, which is a Spanish version of DIBELS, Acadience has a really terrific one. There are several out there that are also being developed, and California, my home state, I am really excited. UCSF Dyslexia Center has developed a screener for the state of California. It is not just dyslexia, it's a universal screener. It already exists. It's called Multitudes in Spanish and English, and very soon it will be in Asian and other languages as well. And it's a very unique measurement tool. And then I'm going to tell you about one other one that's pretty exciting because it's open source and free out of Stanford University. It's called ROAR, like a lion roar, capital ROAR. Right now it's first grade through 12th, only in English. It will be adding kindergarten and it will be in Spanish. And guess what? You can take it online and see how easy it is to use, and you can use it with kids. They intend it to remain open source. We do want to see those screening and diagnostic and progress monitoring measures. We want to be sure that these foundational skills are there to identify needs. We want to see phonics measures that use real and pseudo words. We do want, sorry, I moved too quickly. We do want an ORF to figure out how kids are doing in relation to comprehension. It would be terrific if there are spelling surveys or they're included. And we'd like to see, and I'm going to put a plug in for my own book, Assessing Reading Multiple Measures, because we also assess multisyllabic words. And that's important. And the multisyllabic words that are assessed in it represent all the syllable types. And so that's important as well. Okay, again, we've got a diagnostic, we've got glossaries here. That's very important. And then, I love this. The Reading League took the time to list for each of the components the studies, the sources that this was based on. So it's evident that it's research-based. And this goes on and on for every component. Now, remember I said I had some reservations about EdReports, using it alone. Well, here's why. EdReports provides a general framework, okay? They're looking at materials that have a general framework. However, there are materials that lack opportunities for students to engage in activities on a daily basis. This is taken right from one of the curriculum that they gave greens to, American Reading Company. The problem is most people just look at the front, which lists all greens. They don't dig into the full reports. And if you go to the full reports and look at kindergarten and first grade, you're going to see this. So I find the drawback that without looking at the full reports, you could be misled on selecting a curriculum that might not be as strong in, say, the foundational skills. Now, while we know that word recognition is not all, it's necessary but not sufficient, but that's a lack. That's a huge problem, unless you end up having to get another curriculum to just teach the word recognition. This is taken right from first grade, again in the same curriculum. Students learn 120 plus high frequency power words as a flash speed memorization. This is first grade. That's American Reading Company. They're going to kill me when they find out I've said this. But this is in Ed Reports. It's public. It's right there in the full report. Then notice the direction that's also there. In the directions, it says, remember, the student shouldn't be asked to try to sound out any word in a 2G text. If they can't use syntax, meaning, and the initial consonant. Okay, what do we all know that really is called? Cueing. This is why I have difficulty. I know I'm going to hear from them. Okay, this is kindergarten. It's in the full report, public domain, limited opportunities for students to engage in oral language activities to practice phonological awareness, limited examples for instruction in syllables, sounds, phonemes, limited explicit instruction for systematic and repeated teacher modeling. I don't think I need to go on. And second grade didn't meet expectations for explicit instruction in grammar and conventions. But again, if you just went to the initial review, it's all green. Okay, I think I've made my case. Would I use Ed Reports at the start maybe to narrow down curriculum that I might order from publishers and then use the curriculum evaluation guidelines to dig in with my team? Yes, but only if I've gone to those full reports. I will still want to go to those full reports and make sure before I get myself in trouble that I've done a real honest look. Remember that Ed Reports was based on the Common Core state standards. It wasn't based on the science of reading. They are making changes, and I'm confident that they'll be stronger. I really am. But right now, if you go to the full reports, you will see that they have done a good job. So you can use it as a starting point, maybe order 2 or 3 publishers to bring in their materials, but then use your curriculum evaluation guidelines to really go through it thoroughly. And then the workbook, which you're getting the link to if you don't already have it, is a protocol for reviewing curriculum, a place to make notes, with really cool drop downs to determine the ratings, a clear way to rate overall and identify red flags. It also has a glossary, so it's educative. It actually teaches you as you go through it. Now, what are my recommendations? First, you do need to invest in teacher knowledge. As the Reading League's document said, you need people who are knowledgeable in the science of reading before they start evaluating materials. Narrow down your choices, use the curriculum evaluation guidelines and the workbook. Provide sufficient training then and ongoing support when they get a new curriculum. This one, number 4, is something that sticks in my craw. People get a new curriculum, and unfortunately, too often, teachers are told, follow the teaching manual, or maybe they get a day, 2 days with a publisher, and they're on their own. Would you board an airplane if the pilot greeted you at the foot of the plane and say, "Hi, welcome aboard. I read a manual and spent an hour with someone. Let's take off"? I don't think so. Teachers need ongoing support. They deserve it, and it needs to be intensive. You want to build in regular time for teachers to study the lessons together and then review data and identify gaps and support each other. But this is important. You still have to teach the curriculum once you've selected it as designed. Why? Because if you don't, how will you know if there are gaps? It's kind of like a doctor saying, take 3 pills twice a day, and you decide, I'm going to take 2 once a day, and then you go back and blame the doctor for not getting well. Well, you didn't do what you were supposed to do. No curriculum is perfect. There will be gaps, but you want to give it a good try to begin with. And I'm going to conclude with this and then leave plenty of time to take questions. Literacy, and I love this quote, literacy is the bedrock of every elementary school and should be the #1 priority for post-pandemic educational recovery. A high-quality elementary curriculum imparts essential foundational skills in early literacy and uses rich, engaging, and culturally responsive literary and informational texts. This allows students to build background knowledge of the world as they learn to read and draw meaning from print. It's a critical component. However, identifying such a curriculum can be difficult. And that's why we need this curriculum evaluation guidelines tool. So I'm going to stop sharing and take any questions that are out there. I think I want to add one other comment. We need to understand that there's not a strong body of research yet on how to build background knowledge. There are some who argue you use only a topical approach with a lot of texts on the same topic. And there are other studies that used themes and had a broader approach. We don't have the definitive answer yet. So for my money, I kind of like to use both since we don't have all the data points yet that give us that full knowledge. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn this over to any questions that are out there.
Jeannie, I had Jeannie, our colleague from Wisconsin, I had you kind of watching the chat. So if you want to just call out people that have a question and have them open mic, that would be awesome.
David?
Hi. Thank you.
Hey, you had some really good questions. There's something you want to talk about?
Oh, yeah. Thanks for doing this, Linda. This is great. Perfect timing. I think like a lot of Michigan schools are starting to look at curriculums. So my question, I don't know if you saw it, But first question was, any chance the Reading League will eventually start to evaluate curriculums? I think it's a lot of work. Two problems that I'm running into. It's pretty time consuming. And then the second one is the people that are doing the evaluations of curriculums and choosing curriculums don't have the knowledge. So it's been tough. So
Yeah,
any
no.
words of wisdom or advice would be appreciated.
Well, yeah, first I would say they need knowledge. There's no question. You have to. Apart from choosing a curriculum, teachers need that knowledge training, whether it's letters, whether it's the online elementary academy from my company that I retired from CORE, whether it's from an organization like Glean Education, whether there are other ones, AIM Academy has some good ones. Teachers deserve knowledge. If they didn't get it in their teacher prep, which I know the bulk did not, then they deserve it. And I think of what we need to do as three parts: knowledge building, appropriate resources, that means the curriculum, the assessments, and a system of support, and that includes leadership, and that includes coaching, that includes a multi-tiered system. So they have to have the knowledge. I wouldn't want an evaluation team to not have had knowledge. Now, your question first was, is the Reading League going to evaluate? I don't know. At this point, I would say probably not. Different states have different criteria they've set up to select materials. And what you said, David, is exactly why everyone goes to EdReports, because it seems to be done for them. But darn, they better read those full reports for each grade.
Thank you.
Cheryl, you had a question. Do you want to share yours?
Hi, Cheryl.
Sure. Hi, Linda. I really appreciated everything you had to say. You were just, I felt like you were on fire there a couple times. I was cheering you on in my den here.
Oh yeah, well, you know me, I'll get in trouble.
I get in trouble too. We're in the same trouble spot. My question is about interventions. You know, so much of what you had to say does apply to interventions as well. But is there, or will there be some similar tool for interventions?
Good question. So I don't know as yet that there'll be one, because really, in truth, it's going to be the same, some of the same concepts. The difference will be a greater emphasis on assessment and being able to use the assessment data, particularly diagnostic tools, to figure out exactly what's needed in a multi-tiered system, say tier 2, tier 3. And I think that might be where the start is. Now, there are some ideas about developing some possibly tools, resources around intervention for older students, because we know we've got a large number of middle school and high school students who are struggling readers, and that might be a useful tool.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question that they want to unmic? You know, Linda, I just have a question.
Sure.
This is such a robust tool, and I can't imagine a curriculum hitting all these points and getting
Yeah.
green flags for every single one. So how does somebody make that decision when they know there's weaknesses in some areas and strengths in another?
Yeah. I think there will never be a perfect curriculum. I said that before. There will be gaps. So how do you make that decision? Well, if you're seeing an overabundance of red flags, I rule that out. okay? But if I'm not seeing enough of the areas that we do want to see, I need to ask myself, where am I seeing that gap? Can I fill it? If I don't think I'm going to be able to, and the foundational skills of word recognition may or may not, because there are some really good foundational skills curricula out there now. I know, for example, Bookworm's differentiated instruction, it's separate from the whole Bookworms, has very good foundational skills. SIPS does a really terrific job of those foundational skills. Magnetic, a new one that got listed on Ed Reports just for the foundational skills. But I think it's a lot harder to find good curriculum that builds background knowledge, that has strong content and syntax. So I'm going to look at those areas as well. But I have to decide, what is what are we capable of? Can I fill this gap? Do I have the resources? If my school picks a new program and that they've spent all their money and they're not going to be able to augment, then I better get a program that's strong on the foundational skills for sure, for the K3 at least, or K2 at the very least. Does that answer your question? Okay. I think I saw a question in the chat about recommended curriculum for adolescents. I think there was something, but I lost it.
Yeah, there's one that says suggestions for older materials. Is that meaning older students?
Yeah.
No, it means, what do you do with all the old curriculum
Okay.
materials that you have? How do you organize them? How, you can't throw away books. We can't do that. Suggestions for the closets and closets of materials that we have. This is Amanda, sorry.
Can you donate them?
I wondered if you had any other suggestions for using them in more appropriate ways.
Okay, so let me talk about level text, because that's probably what most people's closets are filled with.
These are actually even older than that. These are the big books that were used for like the teacher, even before level text. So
Okay.
those are the ones I'm looking for.
Yeah, I'm not sure how useful they'll be. And here's why. Once you're using a curriculum with a systematic scope and sequence of phonemic awareness and phonics, using materials that don't align just creates more confusion
Chaos.
for the
Mhm.
kids. Now, I have been asked often this question around all the scads of level text that people have in their closets. And what I say is, okay, once the kids are decoding, and they're reading fluently at past, through all the short CVC words and into more complex long vowel patterns, particularly long vowel patterns, they can use some of those books for independent reading, but then they're going to be well past the early levels.
For sure. Yeah. I've had a lot of teachers that are like, can we just put them in our classroom libraries for like the kids that are looking for extra? And I was like, I'm gonna ask what we do with those materials, and so, okay. I do understand the chaos too, that if you continue to put things in, it's just almost an overabundance. So, and teachers get confused.
Well, it's more specific than that. If haven't yet learned certain sound spellings, but those
Yes.
appear, then you're just back to them relying on guessing.
Guessing. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. I think a question popped in again about older kids.
It did. If you want to recommend programs for older struggling readers.
Yeah, well, okay. So again, this is where I get in trouble because I never hesitate to give my preferences. I do like SIPS Plus for those older students, and SIPS Plus and Challenge. Challenge is all multisyllabic words. SIPS Plus includes, if they're still struggling with some of the single syllable words, it's strictly word recognition for older students. I love Rewards also as an intervention when it's around words, and those syllable patterns in particular. There's an amazing new one called The Third Quest, published by Ancora Publishing, ANCORA, The Third Quest. And then there's one called Starry, published by the SERP Institute, S as in Sam, ERP. It's a pretty fantastic intervention, really well done, strong research base. It's aligned to, if you haven't seen it, the newest IES practice guide for intervention for students, older students, 4th grade through 9th grade. It's one of the What Works Clearinghouse IES practice guides, and Starry was written with an alignment to it. It's capital STARI from SERP, SERP. Oh, language, exclamation, live. Again, another really good one. I almost forgot. Read 180 can work. The challenge with Read 180 is the temptation to have kids just go sit at the computer and not interact. It works well if that is handled well.
Okay, we're at 8 o'clock. I did want to add one thing. Linda just spoke to the Third Quest, the Science of Reading Instructional Coaches Facebook page. We have a YouTube that Marilyn walked all the way through the Third Quest. So if you want to know more about that, she's just a delight as well. So there's a nice overview of the Third Quest if you want to take a look at that. And
And
yeah.
Cheryl just asked, what about SIPS Plus? But that was
Plus,
the
yes.
first one I mentioned. So yeah, SIPS Plus was the first one I spoke to.
I want to also say thank you to you for talking about the extensive, once we have the curriculum, the drive-by PD doesn't work. All of our science of reading training. So I'm walking away from a school at 5 years. We just keep unpacking wonders with the rope and with the complex text, and you keep that curricular resource at the whole, and you become so intimate with it, and then looking at it with your data, what's working, what's not working, what instructional routines. So I appreciate you lifting that, because the work just begins once we get it in-house. And how do we keep that at the core? So I really appreciate you lifting that. I appreciate your truth telling, your vigor for the mission. All kids can learn to read, and our mission is to empower all the teachers to get them there. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and what you bring to the community. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, everyone that was here. Have a fabulous evening, everyone. Thank you.